Countdown. Welcome to another edition of the Willie Bragg Show, hosted by yours truly, Willie Bragg. I wanted to talk about a subject that is discussed by diehards from both parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, and I'm speaking mostly from an independent mindset. But even though that I'm speaking from an independent mindset, because I am very independent. Unfortunately, because I am politically on the left, and for better or worse, the Democratic Party sits on the left end of the U.S. political spectrum, and the Republican Party sits on the right end of the political spectrum. I think this is something we can kind of more or less agree on. And left and right has varying degrees. Not all leftists are a monolith. Not all people on the right are a monolith. And the problem in this country is that you have partisans, or you have people, even people who do not think they're partisans, they have a narrative that they're just going to go and make sure it gets hammered away as a gotcha point. And I'm guilty of this too. By the way, I mean, no matter how well intentioned some people may be, they're going to they're going to have a point of view, and they're going to go and play for their team. And I'm not going to go and blame them for it to a point, but you know, when there is a total rejection of nuance, that's when I get a little perturbed. Now, let's go with going back to history. Let's go with, hold on a second. Let's go with the presidential election in 1860. Abraham Lincoln versus Stephen Douglas. Now, let's go with the two-party system, how it kind of we ended up having that. We've had multiple parties over the years, but it started with the Democratic Republican Party being founded in 1792, and the factions over the years. In 1828, the Democratic Party, as we know it today, exists. Over the years, I would say that the Democratic Party was in many ways a right-wing party in the 19th century. Probably by the time Roosevelt came along, and I'll go into Roosevelt in a minute, things started to change. But the Democratic Party is the party of liberalism, centrism, social democracy to a degree, left-wing populism. It sits on the left-wing end of the political spectrum. The Republican Party was founded in 1854 by smaller parties. One big party, the Whigs, along with the Free Soil Party, the Liberty Party, the North American Party, and the Anti-Nebraska Party. And I will argue that since it was mostly an abolitionist party fighting slavery, that it was a left-wing party pretty much from the mid 1800s to, I will say, probably about the time after Theodore Roosevelt, after his presidency was over. And maybe, I would say that's probably when it was grifting toward a right-of-center conservative party. And it was generally a center-right party, I would say, definitely by the time the New Deal came along with Roosevelt. But it was a center-right party with a liberal wing, still as part of the party. And I would say that by the time Barry Goldwater came along in 1964, that was when the Republican Party took a hard turn right. And it is kind of unfair that I have to go mention Barry Goldwater's name, because really and historically you will find out later on that Barry Goldwater was indeed an honorable man, and it was an accidental situation, which I will go to in a moment, as how the Republican Party became what it became. But it was finally cemented with the Reagan Revolution in 1980, where the party was in a right wing trajectory, and it shifted more and more and more to the right. The Democrats, by the way, even though they're on the center left, tagged along with the Republicans and shifted further and further and further right along with the Republicans, but at a slower speed, and being more moderate in some ways. I can make an argument that the Republicans and the Democrats are both right wing parties too, and I have argued that before. So, anyway, 1860, both Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas, both from Illinois, both ran. The Lincoln ran as a Republican. Douglas ran as a Democrat, and and it was the issue of slavery and other issues too. But slavery played a big part in that election, and the Civil War, took place from 1861 to 1865, and slavery was abolished. The radical Republicans, and I'm saying this in a good way, the radical Republicans were anti-slavery. They were abolitionists, and they were working toward that. There are divisions on how abolitionists may have viewed the blacks living here in the United States, but overall they knew that slavery as an institution needed to disappear, and I commend them for what they did in getting rid of slavery. Slavery was replaced eventually, especially in the South, with the institution of Jim Crow. That started, for sure, after Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, about separate but equal. But separate but equal ended up being just separate, certainly not equal. So anyway, that was basically, I would say, the first phase with regard to where you can define Republicans and Democrats in a left-right, left-right spectrum. And there are some weird nuances, because people like Robert LaFollette of Wisconsin, a Republican senator who founded the Progressive magazine in 1909, one of the best magazines available, news publications available today, by the way, was certainly very socialistic in his worldview. So, but let's go into where I would say our modern era will start, and that would be from the time period of 1932, with the election of Franklin D. Roosevelt and the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980. And you can argue that from 1932 on to the present was basically a clash between the two visions of the FDR's New Deal consensus and the Reagan Revolution. Unfortunately, from my perspective, the Roosevelt New Deal consensus, which was kind of enthusiastically adopted by the Democrats and reluctantly embraced by the Republicans for many years, because it worked. The New Deal got us out of the Great Depression. The thing about it is that with regard to what happened, Reagan came along in 1980 and pretty much reversed it to such a point where Democrats, starting with people like Bill Clinton in particular, shifted or Reaganized the Democratic Party. Basically, where the Democrats and the Republicans are very much the same. I don't give a damn about the culture war issues. When it comes to the economics, that they are pretty much the same. I mean, you look right now. when Republicans try to scare people about socialism coming around if you elect the Democrats. Well, we have a president named Joe Biden who does not support Medicare for all. He gave a little bit of lip service to the unions, but when it came down to it, did not passionately pursue labor law reforms that would expand union rights. There was no serious effort to get the $15 hour minimum wage. There's no Green New Deal. There's no free college, no debt, forgiveness or anything that's actually would catch us up with other countries in Western Europe, most notably what I call social democracies or democratic socialists. And within the socialist movement, there's the terminology has a lot of nuance too, and people debate that issue to death. But suffice to say that I would say that's where the party switch took place, because a lot of African Americans were voting Republican because Lincoln freed the slaves, and in the South, a lot of African Americans voted Republican in areas where they were able to legally vote. But there was a lot of obstacles by the Democrats in the South. And a lot of modern day Republican partisans and diehards will tell you that, lecture black people, well, we freed the slaves and the Democrats are the real racists and what have you. Well, here's the thing. The Democrats, basically, the people who are for civil rights in our modern era were pretty much New Deal Democrats and Republicans. As horrible as I think that Senator Robert Taft was when it came to Taft-Hartley, which created right to work, most notably in the South, by the way, Robert Taft was very much a staunch supporter of racial equality and actually drafted civil rights bills in the Senate for racial equality. So on one hand, I can't stand Robert Taft for weakening our unions, but on the other hand, Robert Taft deserves a great deal of respect for fighting for racial equality. Dwight Eisenhower, who was no right-winger. He certainly was not necessarily a liberal, but he kept the New Deal consensus going on. And he nominated Republicans and Democrats alike into the Supreme Court. And that Supreme Court basically brought about the official end of segregation through the Kansas versus Board. What's the name of that Supreme Court decision? Oh gosh, hold on a second here. I am in a let's see, Board of Education, 1954. I am actually having a mental fart right now. Let's see, Brown versus Board of Education, and I do not know why I forgot that. I'm embarrassed, but anyway, it was called the Warren Court. Chief Justice Earl Warren, Republican. And his court was the most pro-civil liberties court in the history of America. And who criticizes the Warren Court today? A lot of modern Republicans. They criticize a Supreme Court that Dwight Eisenhower helped draft it, and helped draft it with Earl Warren, who was a Republican, and in my opinion was the greatest Chief Justice this country's ever had in the U.S. Supreme Court. This court, the Warren Court, expanded civil liberties, individual rights, expanded free speech rights, and worked for racial equality. And actually rights for everybody, including rights of the accused. And some people don't even like that. Well, anyway, as Richard Nixon succeeded Lyndon Johnson, everybody thought that the court was going to go for the right, but it really didn't. It was just basically still the continuation of the Warren Court, but the Warren Burger Court was at probably a slightly slower speed. But it was definitely not a right wing court. Things like Roe versus Wade took place. Things like what was it? The Supreme Court decision in 1972 that abolished the death penalty for 5 years. Greggs versus Georgia, I believe it was 1972. Death penalty was abolished. So certain things started happening that the progressive view of what America should be with regard to constitutional rights. That was the golden age, and you can argue that both Democrats and Republicans, with that consensus, kind of kept this country in a way where freedom was being expanded. I will argue. that the Warren Court and the Burger Court combined, we were a much more free society then than we are today with the Rehnquist Court under Reagan and the Roberts Court that exists today. Because the court is so stacked to the right. Reagan and Bush one stacked the court far right. For a brief moment, Bill Clinton might have put one decent justice in there, and that was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But Bush came in there and put some horrible people in there, and Trump pushed the court further right. And even the appointees of Obama were pretty generic, corporate Democrats types. So the Supreme Court is garbage today. But the court that existed from the time from the Earl Warren period on to the end of the Burger Court, that was probably the golden age for civil liberties era in the United States. So the Roosevelt New Deal consensus was gone, and the Reagan consensus unfortunately still lives with us today. So I would like to go and add another caveat to this, and right now we're going to go into what I would call or go into the area of civil rights. As you can see here is a picture of Martin Luther King and Senator Jesse Helms. Martin Luther King was a Republican in his early years, and I know that people who are going to criticize me for trying to say that the Democrats and the Republicans switch ideologies. It happened in the 1960s with the election between Lyndon Johnson and Barry Goldwater. As I said, Barry Goldwater gets an unfair rap. Barry Goldwater was not a racist. Barry Goldwater, basically, his problems with the Civil Rights Bill of 1964, and he was wrong to be against it, but he was not. He didn't do it for malicious reasons. He was from Arizona, and he was living in an area of the country that did not really have a lot of African Americans compared to the Deep South or what have you. But a lot of Democrats in the South were very grateful for Barry Goldwater for voting against the Civil Rights Act. I think he was like one of like maybe a handful of Republicans in the Senate that voted against the Civil Rights Act of 64. Most Republicans did vote for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. A handful of Democrats voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Many Democrats pretty much on board with it because Kennedy was assassinated, and so Johnson had the momentum to get this bill passed that's been kind of filibustered and kind of just lingering around in Congress for years. Well, Barry Goldwater got the Deep South for the very first time since 1928. He got the Deep South, and the Deep South voted Republican in 1928 because remember Al Smith of New York was a Roman Catholic, and that was just not, got to remember the Ku Klux Klans were very powerful, and even though they were in the Democratic Party for the most part, especially after the Civil War on into well into the mid 20th century. They were very anti-Catholic, so they were not particularly keen on supporting Al Smith. Same thing happened in 1960 with the Dixiecrat Party that was being founded, and that party took quite a few states in the South that were not particularly keen on the idea of John F. Kennedy being Catholic either. But let's enter Jesse Helms. Jesse Helms, when I mentioned Robert Taft earlier, what a horrible person he was in economics, very anti-New Deal. Well, even a lot of segregationist Democrats were nominally pro-New Deal. They weren't extremely pro-New Deal, but they liked some of the, they liked Social Security, and they liked some of the programs that came along with the New Deal. Jesse Helms, as a Democrat, born and raised in a Democratic family, in 1950 made a lot of news for himself when he worked with Willis Smith within the Democratic primary to defeat Franklin Porter Graham, who was the incumbent Democratic senator at that time, who was a very staunchly pro-New Deal and pro-civil rights. Well, Franklin Porter Graham was defeated in that primary, and Willis Smith became the senator. Jesse Helms worked with Willis Smith because Willis Smith was a segregationist. As the head of the North Carolina Bankers Association in the 1950s, Jesse Helms was staunchly anti-New Deal in all its form. He ran for city council. I believe he ran in 1957 for city council. He ran as a segregationist. In the late 1960s, for WRL Channel 5, he did what was called Viewpoint, which was the commentary that was on the local news. And Jesse Helms basically was echoing, basically belching out racism, and then belching out, supposedly communist agitators, that sort of thing. And in 1972, he ran for the U.S. Senate as a Republican, no longer a Democrat, and ran openly pro-segregationist, ran on an anti-communist campaign, anti-law and order, and even race-baited Nick Galifianakis, who was the Democratic candidate. And there was billboards around the state of North Carolina saying, "Vote for Jesse Helms, he's one of us," indicating that Nick Galifianakis, because his Greek ancestry, may not make him quote-unquote white enough. So think about that. With Jesse Helms basically fought tooth and nail in the early 80s to stop the Martin Luther King Day from becoming an actual official holiday, at a time when even many conservative Republicans who were Democrats becoming Republicans sort of had to kind of, it was politically toxic to be so openly racist. And even a lot of segregationist Democrats that did not switch over to the Republican Party, I would contend that a lot of them kept their views to themselves and decided to be for civil rights, the same way that a lot of Democrats who were against same-sex marriage 10 and 15 years ago eventually had to come around and start saying, well, okay, well, now I'm for same-sex marriage. I evolved. So a lot of these Democrats in the South, a lot of white Democrats who were really racist, they went and evolved too for their political survival. But many, many Democrats joined the Republican Party, which was racially neutral in many ways, and it's this what is called the Southern Strategy. And that was a thing. There are Republicans and conservatives that will say that's not true. There was never any party switch, but there was. There was. What makes a lot of the former segregationist Democrats in the Republican Party today worse than their counterparts when they were actual Democrats is that once they came into the Republican Party, they may have quiet down on their toxicity when it comes to the racism, but you know what? They ended up embracing the fucked up economics of Ronald Reagan too. Now, in Ronald Reagan's case, he did switch parties in 1962, but I will argue that Ronald Reagan did not switch to the Republican Party from the Democrats because of the race questions. It was in Reagan's case, it was economics. It was economics in Reagan's case. I don't like Ronald Reagan. I think he was one of the more negative presidents in our history, but I don't think that Ronald Reagan was, a racist or what have you. But I do think that Reagan did exploit the issues, just as most Republicans do. Dog whistles, and a lot of people saying in modern times, well, Donald Trump did not even use dog whistles. Oh, yes, he did. He used dog whistles. His dog whistles were no louder, in my opinion, than Mitt Romney's dog whistles, or John McCain's dog whistles, or George W. Bush dog whistles, or Bob Dole's dog whistles. And we can go into a whole other debate on maybe too many self-righteous liberals calling everybody that they disagree with as racist, which is just as ridiculous as when right-wingers and Republican types, if you disagree with Republican Party politics in any way, shape, or form, where you're just an anti-American, socialist, communist, baby killing, terrorist lover. And, that's how crazy it is when people sit there and point fingers at each other. So, anyway, the Martin Luther King, Jesse Helms divide is another indicator of it. Because remember, Martin Luther King was a Republican who became a Democrat. Jesse Helms was a Democrat that became a Republican. So, anyway, let's go into what I would say now is getting a little closer to our modern time. And give me a moment here. And I would say that a little bit closer to our modern time would be two familiar people. And you can argue, are they really Democrats and are they really Republicans? I'm talking about Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont and former President Donald Trump. In a lot of ways, and the diehard Donald Trump MAGA crowd and Bernie, a lot of people who are Bernie bros like myself will probably, for similar reasons, even though they hate each other, will strangle me for what I'm about to say. And that is that in many ways, both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, being anti-establishment, did what they did because there was a lot of problems in this country. A lot of problems by wishy-washy liberal Democrats and rhino Republicans. They created a mess in this country. What I call the Authoritarian Center. Both parties are in bed with corporations, and even though they may have some culture issue divides, they usually have the same donors who wants to go and bribe for whoever's the winning team. And the thing about it is that Bernie Sanders came around to try to steamroll and put a stop and reverse the course that the Democratic Party was going into. And I hate to say that it was a failure on Bernie Sanders' part, but he wanted to reverse the Bill Clinton direction that the party, where Bill Clinton Reaganized the Democratic Party. Donald Trump doesn't have an ideology. People can sit around and say, well, he's this nasty, a racist asshole, what have you. I think he's an asshole. I don't particularly think he's bigoted. I don't think he has an ideology. I think that he's a used car salesman, if there ever was one in American politics. And he grifted into the national stage and reshaped his views in exactly the same way as people like Tim Pool and Dave Rubin and people like that did on the online in social media. They're going to go and shape themselves into a direction. And Hunter Avalon did that from the right to the left, and Tim Pool and Dave Rubin from the left to the right. Well, Donald Trump. Enter Donald Trump. He basically created was basically a right-wing populism, because there were Republicans who did not trust Donald Trump. We're talking about the Christian right. We're talking about foreign policy neocons. We're talking about the people who are the pulse of the Republican Party. A lot of them did not trust them, but there were people, there were Republicans, and there were independents, and there were Democrats that liked Trump because his message basically says, I'm going to do something about this corruption. Bernie Sanders, same thing. An independent entered the Democratic primary, and he did the same thing. I'm going to go and do something about the corruption and do something about business as usual. Now, ideologically, I'm on Bernie Sanders' side. You can see the Bernie Sanders sign I still have right there to this day. And the thing about it is that both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump were kind of preaching the same message. That you've been fucked over, and you've been fucked over, and you've been fucked over, and I'm going to fight on your behalf. Whereas, whether it's Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio, or whether it's Hillary Clinton or someone like what's another Democrat I can think of, establishment Democrat that I can think of right now. Someone like Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer, these people don't give a damn about you and me. And the thing about it is, I don't necessarily even think that Donald Trump gives a damn. But Donald Trump knew what was hurting the American people, and he that's where he did his right-wing populism. I think it was a fake populism, but it was a populism, so to speak. Now, Bernie Sanders' populism was the real deal. Now, but unfortunately, Bernie Sanders been demonized by corporate Democrats. They blame him for the election of Trump in 2016. I even think Bernie Sanders blamed himself for it. But I can tell you, Bernie Sanders did not cost Donald Trump to win in 2016. Hillary Clinton cost Donald Trump to win in 2016 because it was Hillary Clinton who was friends. Bill and Hillary Clinton, who were both friends with Donald Trump, encouraged Donald Trump to run to cause havoc within the Republican primaries. And then Donald Trump realized, I could possibly win this election, so fuck the Clintons. I'm going to go and become president. And so there you have it. It wasn't Vladimir Putin. It wasn't Jill Stein. It wasn't Bernie Sanders. And it wasn't the actress Susan Sarandon that got Trump elected. What got Trump elected was Hillary Clinton's ego and her incompetence. So anyway, enough about Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. We're going to go into the later stage right now. And, we're talking about the two drama queens in Congress. Again, the similarity is that they're both polarizing, without a doubt. And they both had their committee assignments stripped away from them for different reasons. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now, I despise Marjorie Taylor Greene with no question about it. I despise Marjorie Taylor Greene. I lost a lot of respect for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But they are both, when it comes to the culture war, they both are like the poster child of the culture war and the two-party system that clashes. And they are a diversion. I know I sound like Farron Cousins sometimes. Well, look what Marjorie Taylor Greene said today, or look what she did, because she's a fucking ass clown, and she's a bitchy little QAnon Karen, and I despise Marjorie Taylor Greene. I am deeply disappointed with AOC. And the thing about it is that AOC, she, I remember I was a simp for AOC 3 years ago. AOC could do no wrong 3 years ago, but AOC turned out to be a letdown. Now people be like, well, how come you defend Bernie and still to this day, and you give him wiggle room and you make excuses for Bernie, but you don't for AOC? And I will tell you exactly why. Because the thing about it is that I know that Bernie Sanders have kind of lost his will in a lot of ways. He's been a lifelong fighter, and being a lifelong fighter, unfortunately, it he basically got his spirit crushed with being cheated out of the nomination twice. So, anyway, that's what's going on, folks. And I kind of went all over the place in some ways, but I still think that what we see here was a two-party system change from Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln in 1960 to Marjorie Taylor Greene and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez today. The left became the right, and the right became the left, and vice versa. And so, the thing about it is, the Democrats are the party of political correctness and SJWism and being woke, and you know what a Democrat is like when they're driving on the road. They got the little coexist sticker on their car or something like that, and tolerance and peace and love and all that good stuff. A lot of Republicans, they'll especially even a lot of Republicans who claim that they're opposed to racism, and a lot of them end up with the little Confederate flags, and they get triggered by the idea of taking down a Confederate statue. And my position is, don't take down the Confederate statue and destroy it. Put it in a fucking museum, because it's history. It is history. And the thing about it is that you don't want to deny the history, but there's no denying that the Confederate memorials and Confederate flags in various states in the South took place because of Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. It was meant to be a form of defiance, and it's kind of funny that they'll go around and act like that they judge a man by the content of his character than the color of his skin. But they certainly didn't with Willie Horton in 1988. They wanted to make an issue out of the color. Jesse Helms and Harvey Gantt ran against each other in 1990. The commercial ad with using affirmative action with the white man balling up a piece of paper. And there is no real reverse discrimination against whites. But there's a lot of discrimination against blacks. We can have a debate whether racial quotas or affirmative action is the way to go, what have you. I certainly think income inequality is where things are going wrong in this country, and there are poor people from every race, every demographic possible. And it's not because of who they are. It's the structure of our economy. There's a lot of wealthy pieces of shit assholes out there. I don't care if you're a white billionaire. I don't care if you're an African American billionaire. I don't care if I don't care what race, what religion, what point of view in life you are. If you're making multi-millions at the expense of working people. And that's what it comes down to. Some people say that's class reductionism. I would say that if you're a leftist, we're all class reductionists to a degree, but not the way that the detractors want to paint it. Because listen, racism is real, bigotry is real. This is why I oppose capital punishment. This is why I've always talked about this situation when it comes to police brutality and the criminal justice system that heavily discriminates against the people of color. So anyway, I ranted on and on and on this morning. So let me look at this chat line over here. And hot retarded chicks, good morning. Great seeing you again. I'm always happy to see you here. Let's see. Stephen Richard. Karl Marx sent a letter to Abraham Lincoln congratulating him on his re-election and his stand against slavery. They became pen pals. That is true. John Nichols, I believe is his name. He writes for The Progressive. magazine. I saw him talk about that on C-SPAN years ago. And hot retarded chicks, you're absolutely right. Biden is a liar. And um, I make fun of the right when they say "Let's go, Brandon," because they don't have the balls to actually say "F Joe Biden." But as an actual leftist who knew that Biden was going to be a disappointment, I mean, I don't have a problem with saying "Let's go, Brandon." And I would actually say F Joe Biden right now, but the thing about it is that somebody could report me, and they could interpret it. They can interpret it in a negative way, and I could get censored and all that. But saying to somebody I'm going to use it in the British English sort of way, to sod off. Well, SOD. I love that phrase, sort of. When they say that, or the regular piss off. I mean, it means the same thing. It means your frustration with such an individual, such a person. So, anyway, if y'all like what you heard, press like and comment. If you disagree with what I have to say, comment anyway. We will have a conversation. Feel free to share the content on this channel. As a First Amendment absolutist, it's my duty to inform you to create your own platform and utilize it, because we are, in fact, the muckrakers of our time. Feel free to go ahead and hit that notification bell, hit that subscribe button, and be kept up to date. And until next time, I agree, hot retarded chicks. I absolutely agree. I don't regret voting for Howie Hawkins in last year's presidential election. I'll do it again. Until next time, everybody, remember this: class struggle and free Julian Assange. And take care, and see you all next time. You know what that means. You know what that means.